Hi, I'm Ralph Preston, and we're having another Stroke Buddies Stroke Survivors Support Group meeting. And today we're lucky to have as a guest Micaela Galley, who works for Imago. And she's a neurological occupational therapist, and she's gonna talk to us a little bit about occupational therapy and also about telehealth services for occupational therapy, which is really interesting to me for a couple of reasons, because lots of people are not near a good occupational therapist, and lots of people are not near any occupational therapist if you live out in rural America. So thank you for coming, Micaela. And I guess I wanted you to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what made you choose occupational therapy of all the careers in the world that you could choose.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I don't have any sort of like wonderful story of why I became an OT. A lot of people have like a story that connected them, but my guidance counselor in high school told me about it. And I was like, that sounds great. And then I did it. And I was lucky enough to get into a great school for it. And then when I was taking the classes, I went to Quinnipiac University in Connecticut. And they start the OT classes right away. It's an entry level 5.5 year accelerated program. So right away you start your OT classes, and I thankfully knew I made the right decision and that I really loved it. And throughout the whole time, you just kind of increase your exposure to everything with occupational therapy that really ramp up the classes your junior year, and it was really wonderful. So, and they have a very strong program for neuro rehab, which was also very lucky for me because that ended up being what I wanted to do. And having that exposure kind of in school, so specialized, was really, really great.
Well, that plays right into my next question for you, which is, I mean, I know a little bit about the difference between a standard approach and a neurological approach, but not everybody does, and it doesn't. It's always a good idea to explain it to those who don't, or those who have a little bit of understanding. So, talk to us a little bit about how the neurological approach differs from a standard occupational therapy approach. And I'm talking about in terms of getting better, not because a lot of occupational therapists, or some occupational therapists, concentrate on adaptive techniques. And I'm talking more about um, recovery techniques.
Yeah, definitely. So the basis of therapy is like you have kind of good foundation being a kind of a generalist when you come out of school. And then specializing in neuro is you're focusing really on treating the brain by working with the body. So doing something more musculoskeletal. So say someone has like a hip replacement, there's more of like a structured protocol that you can do, and that's kind of generalized and standardized across the board with, and you're treating the muscles and trying to strengthen the muscles around it so that they can do functional tasks and kind of get back to their prior level of functioning. With neuro, a lot of the times it's hard to get back to that prior level of functioning, and you're also working more with the brain and not as much with like strengthening muscles. You're more there's some parts of it where like you are going to be doing more musculoskeletal things because like maybe your arm's tight, so then your muscles get tight and you have to work on stretching and kind of doing those basic things. But then really the biggest thing is trying to teach someone how to get their brain to communicate with their affected side again. So you're working with the body to communicate with the brain. That's how it is for stroke and like brain injury rehab. It's definitely a lot different, so, and a little bit less structured than something like a musculoskeletal injury.
Well, a lot of people, end up with, a hand. You've seen it. Hand looks like that.
Yep.
So it doesn't have fingers, and maybe they can move one or two, or maybe they even have a fist, but most people end up with a claw. So what are some techniques that you were talking about, brain connections, making brain connections? What are some techniques that you use to teach people um, how to make those connections? Once I use visual imagery, and I found once I got little teeny, just a little flicker of movement. And I went in and showed them at OT, and they got all excited. I wasn't real excited because it wasn't moving, but they said you can build on it. And I found very much so that once you have some movement, that you can build on it. So talk a little bit about how you get that whole process started, because I would assume once you get that started, then you would maybe shift a little bit more towards stretching and exercises and things.
Yeah, definitely. So when someone has like their hands tight or something like that, I will have them do like a regular stretching program. It's really important to maintain the length of your muscles and your tendons. If you have you have like high tone or spasticity because your brain isn't communicating with your arm the right way, and your arm sits like that. I'm saying arm because I work mainly with the upper extremity. Um, and then your arm's kind of sitting in that one position for a long time, your muscles will get tight and you will get, like you said, kind of like a fisted hand or something like that. And that's when stretching and like positioning, trying to work on tone management. So working on getting your muscles longer is going to be helpful. Um, and then the other part of it is avoiding something called learned non-use. So people probably have heard that term quite a bit. Um, just kind of making the connection back to your brain. So if you're not using your arm because it doesn't move very well,
with stroke people. Oh, good.
You're going to probably end up losing that connection, and your brain's going to almost like forget how to use your arm. So just incorporating your arm into daily activities in any way, even if you have absolutely no movement, just getting your arm on the table while you're eating your meal, having it be in your field of view, making it a part of your everyday activities is going to help kind of build that connection back to your arm. Using, even if you have no movement, even like using the weight of your arm to stabilize something. It might even take a little bit longer, but at least your arm's involved in the task, and you can eventually kind of get some of those neurotransmitters to communicate with the muscles in your arm and your affected side. So building that connection back up just by having it involved in everyday tasks. Oh,
I have a
Ralph,
question.
you're muted. Oh, yeah.
So you just said, having it in your field of view. What about, I've read some things about where you cross over to the other side and use the other side of the brain with, I'm not getting it right, but do you know what I'm talking about, where you use both sides of the brain to try to use your arm again?
Yeah, I think what you're kind of talking, it sounds to me like you're kind of talking about neuroplasticity. So like your brain, it kind of adapts to maybe the part of the brain that's not working anymore that was impaired during the stroke. And then your brain, other parts of your brain kind of help start to control your arm. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, also when you use the arm on the other side of the body, and Ralph, do you know what I'm talking about, where you're using the other side of the brain and trying to get them to,
Like a mirror therapy kind of a thing?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
So
muted,
mirror,
Ralph.
You're
Ralph,
muted,
you're
Ralph.
muted.
Ralph, you're muted.
Oh, he's gonna throw his computer
I'm
out the
sorry, I was
window.
there we
muted.
go.
I don't know how I got muted. I wanted to roll my fingers, and so I tried with my affected hand. It didn't work very well, and I didn't know anything about what they call. Well, so I went to this side and I went, okay, that's what it's supposed to do. Leslie Hadley has the best language for this. She called it the teaching side and the healing side. And I love that. So I would look at the teaching side at first, and then I tried them both together, and this side worked a lot better. And I sat there and I would do them together, and then I would try doing this one. As soon as it fell apart, because I didn't know what I was doing. I invented this on the end of my bed. I went into my physical therapist and occupational therapist, took him to lunch, and I said, "You're not going to believe this. You use one side of your brain to get the other side better. And they said, look up mirror therapy. And I did. Of course, I don't use, it's also called bilateral therapy, I believe. And it's a very valid technique. I'm going to quote a neuroscientist who isn't here today. That's Dr. Hetzler. And in discussions we've had in the past, there's about 15% of the signals from your brain stay on the same side. So that's one reason that it works. There's also something called ipsilateral patterning, but I've messed with it a little bit, but I can't find out much science behind it. But I don't know. I'm interested in Caleb's thoughts on this. Because I'm not an OT or a neuroscientist, but supposedly about 15% of the signals stay on the same side. So there are some strategies that you can use that to your advantage. Maybe Micaela uses them in her practice. So I'll get quiet now.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So a lot of times kind of mirroring with the other hand, even if it's not standard mirror therapy, like that's with like the mirror box and your affected hand is behind the mirror, you can't see it, and then your unaffected hand's making movements and you're watching it in the mirror. That's a really good prep activity before you do something else. It kind of helps trick your brain into thinking your unaffected hand is moving. However, the bilateral therapy, mirroring, so you're doing an activity with your unaffected hand and then trying to do it with your unaffected or your affected hand. That's helpful for your brain as well. It's good prep so that you can kind of get the movement down. That is a strategy I teach a lot of people. If we're doing an exercise and they can't quite get it, it's like, wait a second, let's figure out what this is supposed to feel like. So then you can try to channel that over to the other side.
Okay.
That's absolutely a really helpful strategy. Just kind of like taking a step back if you're getting frustrated with a certain task or movement that you're trying to do, taking a second and thinking about like, what is this supposed to feel like? What's a good baseline so that I can figure out how to get there?
Well,
Okay, thank
and
you.
I found in not just in hands, but in all things that form is much more important. And every time when I was doing bilateral therapy, whatever my left hand would break down, like on the finger roll, and I can roll it both ways. That's my affected hand. Whatever it broke down and started firing all crazy again, I stopped. And I repatterned again. So I would do like 5 patterns and then see how many I'd get. In the beginning, I get like 1, 2. Eventually, I got 5 and even more. So it's another one of those things you just have to stick at it. And the other thing about the reason I did that was I found, like in walking and all the things that I was doing, if I developed bad habits, that the bad habits were much harder to get rid of than doing it right the first time. Now, in a hand, that's maybe easier than walking, because walking's so complicated, uses so many things. You can't bend your knee. So a lot of us have to accept certain bad habits, for lack of a better term, in order to be able to walk, to get to where you can develop your gait to where it's closer to where you'd like it to be. But we're talking hands and OT today, so that's just the reason why, in my mind, I had occupational therapy in the rehab hospital, and then I had a little bit of outpatient for the first few months, and then I didn't really have anymore. But I also recovered my hand fairly quickly by jumping on it. When I got that little flicker of movement, I built on it. They said, well, that's great, you can build on it. I kind of went like, okay. But I found it to be true. And I was actually moving my hand before I left the rehab hospital, not very well, and I couldn't get it off my lap. I still had to grab my shirt to get it anywhere, but I could move my fingers a little bit, about like that, by the time I was about 3 weeks. I've also found, Micaela, I don't know if you found this to be true, but over the years, I found about 5 or 6 people who said they got their hand back rather quickly. And in every case, they jumped on it from day one. And, you know, while neuroplasticity lasts a lifetime, there seems to be something about getting on that hand before you get the plasticity or the spasticity or the learned non-use.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the principles of neuroplasticity is time matters. So the sooner after your stroke that you can jump on all of the great things about therapy, the better. But that, like you said, neuroplasticity lasts a lifetime. So that doesn't mean that you're not going to ever make any gains after that 6 month or year period after your stroke. You can still make gains. I've had people even 15 years make really great gains. So I think that's a common misconception that I've had a lot of people tell me is that they were told by someone like well respected, like their doctor or another therapist, that they weren't going to make any gains after a year. And that's not true. It will maybe take more work and it will be definitely more difficult than right after your stroke, but it's not impossible.
Well, I mean, you know, there's a period of 6 months to a year of what they call spontaneous healing. I'm not telling you anything, Micaela, that you don't know, but maybe people who are listening. And that's why, unfortunately, doctors say that. You know, that, okay, the period of spontaneous healing does go away at some point and it becomes more difficult. But on the other hand, I have a friend in Charleston who got her hand back after 5 years. She did therapy, nothing worked. She still had this hand. And what did she do? How did she do that? She went back, she started an intense program of functional therapy doing housework. And she also had a pool and she got her hand in the pool. I've done arms in the pool. I've not seen anything much with hands. Obviously in the pool, like an arm or walking, all are easier because of the buoyancy that your body has. I have no experience with it in terms of a hand, but she said that she did hand exercises in the pool and did housework and functional therapy all the time. When I was in the rehab hospital, they told me about, I didn't know about CIMT, constraint induced movement therapy or motion therapy that Dr. Taub came up with. They did tell me that they didn't use that term, but they said sometimes people put an oven mitt over their affected hand. Or I've heard of stroke survivors who had therapists who would tie their hand behind their back. I don't think they quite tied it, but to force you to use that affected hand. But you can do that on your own. That's pretty much what I did. In that you know, we have no map as to how you do anything. Like you don't know how you open a jar before your stroke. You don't think about it. You just open it. You probably held it with your non-dominant hand and turned the lid with your dominant hand. My non-dominant side was affected, so I started doing things like holding it with my dominant right hand and trying to open jars with my left hand. If you stick with it, it does work. I'm getting ready to edit a video about it. It's incredibly frustrating. Incredibly frustrating. But if you give up, you give up. So, Micaela, I know I'm a big believer in homework as a way to get the most out of your physical therapist or occupational therapist, any therapist. I think therapists notice who is doing the work and who's paying attention, who wants to get better. I see a big smile on your face, so I know that you completely agree with that. You know, you got some people who come in and go, "I'm here, make me better." And you got other people who say, "Okay, what's the plan? What do I need to do at home? What do I need to do?" And I know that you have a little like homework during the week program, I think you call it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, and you're exactly right. So there are people who a lot of times will come in like I usually see people twice a week. So that's 2 hours a week that you're spending on your arm. And while it's good, high quality repetitions, it's not nearly enough to make that neuroplastic change in the brain. It needs to be like constant, and which is frustrating, and it's a big task to take on, but it has to be something that's always involved in your everyday life. Trying to think about throughout your day, maybe your morning routine, how can I get my affected side more involved in every task, even if it is just having it on the counter instead of hanging by my side or sitting in my lap. So those are all things, just finding ways to help my clients incorporate their arm in some way, or doing some part of a task with both hands. That's part of it, for just doing it like throughout the day. And then we usually have people try to spend like an hour or two trying to actually sit down and work on practicing movement. So thinking about whatever functional task is their goal, and kind of picking out the parts of that that maybe are more challenging to do with their affected side, and then doing the kind of exercises and stuff that we've worked on in therapy, outside of therapy, and being very intentional about the strategies you're using, paying attention to your own form. A big thing we do is just like kind of teaching people how to think like a therapist. So thinking, what maybe would my therapist cue me to do right now so that I can have better form and better movement. And if you're working with a therapist now and you're doing things in therapy and maybe you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, you should ask and say like, why are we focusing on this? You should know why you're doing what you're doing, because it's going to help you then be able to carry it over at home and maybe even adapt it and find other ways to do those things at home. So yeah, just lots and lots of reps. But like you said earlier, kind of like high quality reps. If you're kind of doing reps and doing them mindlessly, or like not thinking about how you're moving, then the changes in the brain are probably not going to be as effective in being able to carry over to other things as well.
Well, that
Yeah.
I guess I'm doing the right thing in terms of coaching people, because when they told me to use visual imagery, they told me to think about it. So, and also you can do passive movement. So when I'm coaching people or preaching, I tell people whether you're doing active movement or passive movement, bilateral therapy or mental imagery, that you need to concentrate, you need to think about it, because then you're much more likely to make connections than if you just, like you said, mindlessly do something. Yeah, and you brought up a good point. A lot of people just forget about that arm. They let that arm just hang there and don't do much with it. The more you can involve it, I think the quicker you're going to get better. It worked for me, certainly. Are you a believer in weight bearing? I did some weight bearing. I know they say to do weight bearing on your leg because it tells your brain you want to use your leg. I found it to be true with my hand and wrists as well. I did weight bearing. I also did, the old wax on, wax off, which you can do as long as you can get your hand fairly open. You can do wax on, wax off, even if you don't have finger movement yet. So those things that you think are helpful in hand recovery?
Yeah, I definitely have my clients do a lot of weight bearing. I think it's helpful just to kind of get all the muscles. It's like almost doing a plank, but for your arm. Like all of your muscles are kind of engaged when you're doing that. And having that pressure on your joints also sends signals to help kind of wake up your arm a little bit. So I definitely do a lot of weight bearing. And it can help relax the arm too, especially if someone's arm is really tight. Kind of pushing down, being able to push down on your hand, as long as you're not in any pain, sharp pain, then yeah, definitely. That's a really important exercise.
What other kinds of exercises do you try to assign? I mean, I know there are lots of that probably hand out those printout sheets. We all got several of them. Michelle's laughing. She's probably got a stack this thick of them. What other than involvement and functional therapy, are there any specific exercises that you use often?
To be honest, not really. It's very individualized. So I don't have like a set list of exercises I give to everybody. It's very much like, what do you need to work on and how do we get your arm to move? I've had people who present very similarly, and I will try the same exercise with each of them, and it works for one person, it doesn't work for the other. It's really about like your connection to your arm and how much you're able to use your brain to control your affected side. Um, so yeah, it's very, very much individualized and depends on kind of their level of function. Um, really, I do a lot, like generally speaking, I will add a lot of exercises about just kind of getting control of your arm and knowing where it is in space and being able to maybe like sustain positions is really important before you can actually like actively move there. It's called PNF. I couldn't, it's like peripheral neuro, I don't know the full like name for it, but it's called PNF, and just kind of being able to sustain a position before you can actively move there with any joint is a big kind of theory that we use a lot in our treatment.
This is slightly personal, but for those out there, I've seen posts where people say, you know, my hand's starting to move, but it's supposed to be last, and my shoulder's not working yet. And so they say they're going to wait for their shoulder, which I think is not a good idea. I think if you have any movement anywhere, you should be trying to build on it. And what's personal about this is my hand came back. I was rolling my fingers at 4 months, but it took me over a year to get my shoulder to work. So I think that's I personally think that's a bad strategy. I always say work what works. And when
No immobile shoulders. I was just did a round of physical therapy on my shoulder, and it was already starting to freeze because I didn't realize I was. And so they're like, "Yeah, that's the big people baby it," and And I was talking to somebody else who was a instructor. They're like, "Oh yeah, I did the same thing, and my shoulder froze, and it took like over a year to get any movement. It was very painful to get any kind of mobility back. So yeah, no frozen shoulders, people, not fun."
Yeah, definitely. I guess going to your other question, something I do tell everyone to do is stretch. So I guess there's like one thing that I do with everyone is stretching, and that's something how you can kind of prevent something like frozen shoulder is making sure that you're stretching a lot and doing like scapular mobility exercises, so like kind of like shoulder shrug type things. And if you can't move your affected side, then kind of doing some passive range of motion with your other hand can help just maintain the mobility in your shoulder blade. If your shoulder blade isn't moving, if it's frozen, then you're gonna have a very hard time trying to move your arm anywhere. And then I agree with what you said, Ralph, as well. Like if your hand's moving, move your hand, find ways to incorporate that into daily activities. Even if your arm's supported on the table and then you're working on your grasp, like get your hand moving if it's moving.
Yeah, work what works. It's real
Yeah.
simple. And I did things with local survivors I worked with. I taught them how to like go just above your elbow, and you can do some passive movement trying to get it up. It's for most stroke survivors very difficult to get above shoulder level, and I believe because I put my hand on my scapula, and when I go above shoulder level, I feel my scapula rotating, and I think it's a different set of muscles that you haven't been using for months and months and months. Because it took me like 6 months probably to even get my shoulder level while my hand was working. It was crazy. So the point of this is for people out there listening on YouTube or anybody here in the audience is that there are standard ways of recovery that are in the book, but we all have different strokes and we all have different recoveries. So your recovery may not follow what they say in the book, and that's why follow your body. That's why Micaela said, well, she doesn't have a standard set of exercises because she works individually with patients, and has the benefit of seeing what they can do and also seeing what they respond to. I think a good therapist, a relationship with a therapist should be a lot of back and forth. You should be asking questions about, well, how am I doing? Or, is there anything I should be doing better? And a therapist, I think, should be paying attention to what you're responding to and adjusting the program. Your brain gets used to anything you do over and over again. So it's I see Micaela nodding her head. So I think she's going to agree that it's important to switch things up when it's time to and when it's necessary to. Otherwise, you can plateau. I've had a couple of therapists, physical and occupational therapists, come on this Tuesday show and say, that if your therapist doesn't mix things up, they can cause you to plateau, which I thought was kind of a bold statement coming from therapists. So I know that Imago does telehealth, and this is something that I think was it 5, 6, 7 states, something like that. I think that there's probably we're going to see more of this, not less of this, since Zoom and the pandemic and the fact that a lot of people live in rural areas and can't find any occupational therapist, let alone a good one or a neuro one. And but I'm curious how it works when you can't touch the patients. I suppose you can see it. I don't know. I suppose I should get quiet and let you explain how you break through that. What I see as a minor barrier. The fact you're not in the same room, you can't touch their hand, you can't feel the tightness.
Yeah, a lot of it is just a lot of education and just teaching people how to manage their own challenges with stroke. So teaching people how to stretch themselves and maintain their range of motion. And then the other part of that is if I'm sitting here in a session with you and I'm moving your arm, you're not moving your arm. Your brain's not controlling it. So that's why I feel like the telehealth piece of it's actually been very effective so far with a lot of our clients, because they're not having someone sit there and move their arm for them. They're having to use their environment and the different strategies that they've been educated on to figure out how to get their arm to move. And being able to do that in their home environment, using their own tools and in their space that they're going to be living in and moving in anyways is also very helpful. Doing it in that context of their own home has been a big help, I think, accessibility wise and just for neuroplasticity. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just kind of teaching people how to use their own environment to be able to eventually move their arms. So if I were in a clinic and I was trying to get someone to maybe move their arm, I might use gravity for assistance. So maybe using something like an incline board or a ramp, but maybe they don't have something like that at home. You can make it at home. You can get some books and a cutting board, and that's a ramp. So, and that also is helpful for carrying over their home exercise program. If you get handed a list of exercises, but you don't have weights at home, or maybe you don't have the different things that you are using in therapy, it's a little hard to recreate those things and carry it over, but we're doing it in your home and showing you how to kind of make those things, those work for you. So yeah, it's been interesting. And there are times when I'm like, I just want to help you, but it's also like, I can't, it's not going to benefit you ultimately to have that. And then there are some things where like having a little bit of support from someone else would ultimately benefit them. And that could be helpful for like maybe using their unaffected arm to help, or having a caregiver assist. But that's typically I'm telling people how to kind of use their own environment and different strategies to benefit their motor recovery.
Well, that's interesting. The aspect about I hadn't thought about that aspect, that they're on their own. When you show them something that they're essentially, you can't help them like you can in the clinic, that they're forced. It's sort of a type of functional therapy, because they're forced to function. And I find that there are a couple of different kinds of stroke survivors. If I didn't have something, I would work it out. I mean, there are all kinds of things you can do. I built a little tower of books, and I wanted to be able to block my arm so I could work on wrist movement. So I built a little tower of books, and I could actually hold my arm down so nothing else was involved to work on books. There's a number of things you can do. You mentioned gravity. Another thing you can do, like to get your arm moving, is you can do things on the bed, like lay on the bed and do snow angels. When you take gravity out of the equation, then it's easier to move. That's one of the things about pool therapy, and I found arms work good. I didn't have it. Somebody asked me to help them with their arm in the pool. I hadn't even really thought about it, and I was surprised how well it worked. I've also heard of I know one stroke survivor who didn't have a band for her ankle, so she used knee socks to pull on her ankle. She also got out Campbell's soup cans for 1 pound weights. They weigh 19 ounces, but
Yeah. I have soup right here. I do the same thing. Yeah.
Well, I think that one of the things that's important is to have, when there's a will, there's a way. And I think that if, the people who have a will to get better will find a way. And, some of those same people who come in and go, make me better, typically, I completely agree with you. I found, I asked for homework and I did homework, and I did a lot of homework. I did therapy all day long, every day for a year. Because I just didn't feel like that the therapy I got was enough. In the hospital, I got 5-6 hours a day. And then I went to, for 2 OT, 2 PT a week. So I went from 5 hours, 5-6 a day to 4 a week. And I just said, I want to get better. I'm gonna fill in the blanks, and so I did. So anybody out there who thinks they're going to get better, 1 or 2, and some sessions are 45 minutes, and by the time you do all the business, they can be a half an hour. So it's really takes a home program.
Micaela,
Want.
question.
What, Billy?
It's called you have to want it to get it.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. If you don't want it, you're not gonna get it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to think of, like, people, a lot of times you just don't know, or maybe you didn't go to a hospital that is based in stroke and has a lot of helpful information for you, and maybe like the professionals around you aren't specialized and don't know, so then you don't have the right tools. That can happen a lot, and then from there you don't know what to do. So that's a really common challenge, and just trying to bridge that gap and from going to the hospital to home is really important. And sometimes the part of your brain that can problem solve like that has been affected by the stroke, so it's even harder to get past that barrier. So knowing where to reach out for resources can be helpful as well.
I think that the whole world is behind the curve on strokes. I think that's the problem in a nutshell. And the second problem is you have to have a lot of want and mindset. Because your body, if you cut your body in half, it's a duplicate. So you're a duplicate system. So you can always train the other side of the brain to work, but you have to have the want. You have to have somebody that will help you. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're done.
I agree.
I agree with you about the world being behind on stroke. I think part of it's because the average age of strokes has been moving down for the last 30 years. For a long time, stroke was something that happened mostly to older people, and they didn't. They've always been the odd younger folks, but in a lot of cases, if you're 75 or 80, you're not working, you're not trying to get back to work, you've had a family, and they kind of like just started writing off stroke survivors long ago because most of them were older. As the population gets younger and younger, and it's shocking the numbers, I think it was something like 10 or 15% of people nationally, this is 10 or 15% of people under 65 had strokes. It's now over 30, so it's more than doubled. And where I live in South Carolina, under 65 is over 70%. I live North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia are the stroke belt. Arkansas and Oregon, for some reason, there are other states they study where most strokes occur, and for some reason they occur near here where I live, and they can't figure out why. They've studied diet and a number of things, and they're not exactly sure why. But the number of young people who have families, have kids, want to get back to work. They've got, 30 or 40 years of life ahead of them instead of, 5 or 10 years of life ahead of them. They make a real difference in how stroke is treated. Also, I think Europe is a good bit ahead of us in terms of research and application of research. At least that's what I've heard and read.
I think, Rob, what I think it is nowadays they have statistics where maybe 30 years ago they didn't have these statistics. That's why you see a lot more younger people. They probably were out there, but you didn't know about it.
Well, I mean, if you have a stroke at a hospital, they record it and it goes to the CDC, and that's where the statistics come from. So CDC says it's doubled in the last 20 years, younger stroke,
But
defined as 65 and under.
But you also have computers now, which can store all of the information.
Right.
Michaela, I've got an interesting question for you if you had a
Okay.
minute. I'm new to this group, and Ralph, I appreciate following you on Facebook and you allowing me in the group. Just a little background. I had my stroke 5 years ago. I was 57. I had a right MCA that was in the middle of the night, so TPA wasn't appropriate. So I got a massive right brain injury, which my left side was affected, and I have no spasticity. I actually can lift weights. I mean, I do 40-pound dumbbell over the head presses all the time. I ride my bike all the time. But where I struggle is my left neglect. Through OT, I do the driver's ed. I've flunked it like 6 times in a row. I can handle a vehicle, no problem. When I focus, I lose the stuff on my left side. Have you any strategies or familiar with ways to get around that, or do you just write that off?
It depends on if you have more of like is it like a visual field cut too, or is it like neglect?
Well, when I do the field cut study at my ophthalmologist, I pass that with flying colors. But as soon as I'm trying to focus on something else, that left side goes away.
Wow.
Yeah, that sounds very frustrating, first of all, especially if you're like pretty independent everywhere else and you're trying to get back to driving and that's your barrier. That sounds really tough.
My
But
retirement was traveling and boating. As you can see from my background pictures, I used to do a lot of fishing, and I had a boat for 25 years, and I had to get rid of all that. So I'm kind of assy about that. I do golf a lot, which the funny thing is I'm left-handed and I golf right-handed. But like if I take my grandkids out and try to hit them ground balls left-handed, and I've played ball my whole life, I can't make contact. I can't throw a ball because I have no feeling in my fingers whatsoever. The motion isn't a problem, but without that finger or that fine motor of sensation, it's amazing how you can't, throw a ball.
yeah. Do you have sensation in the rest of your arm, or is it just your fingertips that are impaired?
My fingertips. My whole left side is definitely diminished now. And I guess I should qualify all these statements. I've got 2 daughters. One's a speech path and one's a physical therapist. So I'm certainly well instructed, even though they get irritated with me because they say I don't listen, but I think I do. And I was fortunate. I went to an intensive rehab hospital in Cleveland. I live in north central Ohio. And I got 6 hours a day for a long time. So I went from being paralyzed to walking out of the hospital. But I can't work now, or it's even hard to volunteer because I can't drive. I ride my bike. I put 800 miles on my bike last year. And it's a
Wow.
small town, so I can get around.
Your balance supposed to be pretty good.
Yeah, and it was good. And I'll tell you what I did is early last year, I started riding. I got just a Trek mountain bike and I was riding the trails and my knees and my hips hurt so bad. I actually bought a knee bike, but not one of the ones with a throttle, one that you've got a pedal. So my heart rate still stays about 150 when I ride it. But it's kind of like somebody's pushing you a little bit. And it makes riding the bike fun. Like I was out this morning for about 3 hours. And when I'm done here, I'll go back out again. But I'm trying to, it's kind of like I've gotten 90% there, but just getting the feeling back in the fingers. And the other thing that's really bothersome for me is when I do get active, my nerve pain in the affected side gets real bad. And the musculoskeletal is fine. It's just that I think my brain don't know what to do with the signals that happens coming out of it. So it registers as pain for me.
Have you talked with your daughters about anything for your left side neglect? I had it, and I got over it in a few months. What they told me in the rehab hospital is the only thing I know. It's pretty simple, but it doesn't necessarily work if you have. I mean, I've seen people. I've been with people, and I visited a guy in the hospital one time, and then helped him. And he would eat half his plate. He would tell you he was finished and he was still hungry, and would just turn his plate around and eat the other half. What they told me in the hospital is to try and orient everything over to that side, like have people sit where my TV's up there. So you sit like this way slightly and force yourself to look over there. That's the only strategy I know. I don't know
Oh, OT and rehab.
either Micaela or your daughters have anything they might add to that.
My oldest daughter was actually the director of the rehab program for a small hospital in my town. And one of her OTs said that she called it left focal neglect. She goes, you do all right unless you're thinking about something else. And when I think about something else, and so I do the puzzles, where I got it was the left side of the puzzles that I was making all the mistakes on. And I've gotten that to where, I'll look at that, but I'll do things. I was riding with my wife the other day and she stopped and I'm like, what are you stopping for? And there was a school bus and it was over to my left and I never seen it. So that tells me that's probably not good to have me on the road.
Yeah, definitely. I think I agree again with you, Ralph. That's usually what I'll have people do is just kind of do things and attend to that left side a lot more. Sounds like kind of like they're like different kinds of neglect, like a body neglect or like a spatial neglect. It seems like you're kind of not attending to things on that side. So any kind of stimulus on that side, make it like multiple kinds of stimulus, like sound, like touching, being able to like have you can use like vibration, maybe even on your fingertips might help too, but stimulating that side, and then also just like having like people sit on that side like you said, or doing kind of a strategy that you can do, just making sure that you don't skip that side, is doing like it's called like lighthouse scanning. So making sure that you are turning your head all the way to the left or the right, or left, going from like right to left, and then go down and kind of like scan from one side to the other.
When I ride my bike, I have to do that. I got to constantly tell myself, look left, look left.
Yeah. And right now it seems like that takes a lot more cognitive energy than it probably did before. But it's good that you are reminding yourself. A lot of times people just forget to even use the strategy. So it sounds like you're kind of on the right track there.
Well, we'll keep working at being a little bullheaded. I still think that if they just let me go out and drive, that I would learn to overcome all that. But the doctors aren't too crazy about me.
Another thing you might try would be go to an empty parking lot, some abandoned mall or someplace where there are no other cars around. Hopefully there aren't a lot of, way back when they didn't have the light poles. Now they've got light poles some places you'd have to be careful of. But one of the things you could do would be to practice paying attention on that left side while you're driving in a situation where you don't have school buses and school kids over on the left that you could accidentally run over if you were neglecting them. One of the things that there are a number, some stroke survivors can't drive due to seizures. Others don't trust themselves. They say, it'd be terrible if I accidentally hurt somebody, because that wouldn't be my intention.
I'm a retired firefighter, so I've seen plenty of the bad side of it. So I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, even like a step before like driving, you could even just like with the car off, sitting in maybe like an environment in the car in the driver's seat without the car on, like no intentions of driving, and just trying to identify things on that side. Adding in like a dual task. So maybe you're like doing something like talking to someone, or like doing something with like sorting cards, or like something that takes some energy, but you also have to attend to that side. There's a lot of multitasking that happens when you're driving. That's another skill that people have a hard time with, that stops them from being able to drive. So um, maybe working on that and doing it in the setting of the car so that you're in that environment. But um, like you said, maybe like safety, maybe not driving quite yet, but it sounds like you're doing like you said the driving school and trying to pass that test. So it sounds like you have a good, safe environment to try the driving out
All right.
with.
Well, Ralph,
got in my car after I wanted to drive again. Of course, everybody does. It's your independence. I got in my car without the keys to my truck, actually, and I practiced holding my hand on the steering wheel because it would fall off all the time. And like I said, I didn't have the keys, but first thing I had to do is back out of the garage. So I went to back out of the garage and I went, I can't turn my neck. So you might discover all kinds of things if you, and that's a very good suggestion, Micaela. Go ahead and get in that environment and pay attention to things on the left. I know there were two other things I thought we might, if anybody's got any questions, go ahead, because I got two other things. Micaela runs or started a nonprofit with her mentor. I thought we'd let her talk about that if there's and she also runs a stroke group support group at Imago, and I thought we'd let her talk about that a little bit. But if somebody's got questions.
I did have one. I did have one. So the imagery part I thought was interesting. It kind of reminded me a few years ago. Of course, you know, I'm a lot older, but I don't know if you guys remember back in the heyday of the Soviet Union, the women's gymnastics, they were a powerhouse. And I remember a few years ago, I read an interview with one of the famous, I don't remember if it was Nellie Kim or Olga Korbut, but she said that imagery was like a big thing that you were talking about, Ralph. She said, like, you know, not that it was the most humane program. Yes, we practiced many hours a day, she said, but we would spend hours a day just sitting there running through every routine over and over in our head, over and over and over. And anytime we were going to incorporate a new trick, before we ever even started learning it, we would watch other people, and then you just had to sit and visualize it over to before we'd even start. So I think that's kind of like the same idea. Like she said, it's kind of like, it's like we were training our brains to do it before we even taught our bodies to do it. So I kind of think that's kind of the way we have to do sometimes if we're going to relearn something. It's like we almost have to retrain, think about it and sort of retrain before we actually start doing it. And so I've sort of been trying to incorporate some of that stuff in, you know, I was very lucky. I wasn't paralyzed, but I do have some deficits on my left side. So I've been trying to do that a lot, just run through things that I want to do over and over. And I found it, you know, it actually helps, you know, so I just thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and research supports that as well. Just mental imagery in combination with that, like physical rehab, is the best way to kind of rehab the brain into being able to connect with the arm and get those movements back. That's a really interesting story, though. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Carla, we actually did a talk with Dr. Hetzler, Micaela. He's a retired PhD neuroscientist who had a stroke.
Yeah.
He's done 7 presentations for us on Tuesdays, and this was actually, I believe, on Roadmap. It was on mental imagery, and it definitely works. It's been studied. Believing is part of mental imagery. If you don't believe that you can do something, you probably won't be able to do it. So, and you know, it ties in with the whole passive movement and everything. So I can, I'll send you, I'll make a, I'll make a note to send you that talk
Excellent.
in Messenger.
Excellent.
Anybody else got anything? If not, I was gonna let, Micaela either maybe talk about a support group, and then maybe, we get time. You've got time, Micaela, to talk a little bit about your nonprofit and what your goals are there. But I'm
Wait,
interested. When do you have a question?
yes. What about massages and you using an e-stim for your arms and stuff?
Yeah, massage, if your muscles are really tight, massage is good. I will teach people how to do different like massage on certain muscles if they're really tight, especially in the hand. And then e-stim is great if you kind of qualify to use e-stim. You don't have like a pacemaker or anything like that. It's good. It can definitely be really good to help start moving the arm again. Some people don't respond to it, but some people, a lot of people do. And as long as you're kind of I use more like functional e-stim, so I'll have people use the e-stim during like a functional task. If you're kind of just like having your arm sit there with the e-stim running, that isn't really going to help you as much because you're kind of just like your brain's getting used to that feeling and it's not going to end up moving your hand. But if you're doing it while you're doing something functional or kind of like having it help you do some passive range of motion to do like more active assisted range of motion, that can be helpful. But yeah, I use e-stim a lot with a lot of my clients, especially to help get them moving.
I would assume you do use it in a targeted way, putting the pads in specific places to stimulate certain muscles and doing certain functional activities using those muscles. I heard something weird in one of these meetings, and I've heard it a couple times since. It's the actual therapist telling people to wear e-stim for 8 hours at a time, which makes zero sense to me. You know anything about that? It's more for me to clear. I don't pass that on to anybody because I won't pass anything on until I've kind of verified it with a few people. That seems nuts to me.
I haven't heard that.
Okay.
Not to say like it's not true, but I don't, yeah, I haven't really heard anything like that. I've heard of like, I guess contrary to what I was saying is like you can stimulate like a really tight muscle to help it relax. And that's something where maybe you're not moving, doing a functional activity, but I have not heard wearing it for 8 hours a day. No.
I've only heard it twice. I just remember one of them was Jeff Hammock, and one of the people that sometimes comes to these meetings. And like I said, it makes no sense to me. So tell us a little bit about your support group. Is it in person, or is it on Zoom, or is it a hybrid of both?
Yeah, it's virtual. So everything we do is virtual because we're in like I live in Boston, but I treat patients in Texas, and I also am licensed in New Hampshire. So everything is virtual and everything's telehealth. But so we meet once a month, and anyone who's a stroke survivor or brain injury survivor is welcome to come. And we usually will have a speaker or some of the times a therapist will kind of prepare like a presentation. Like February was American Heart Month, so we did like a heart health talk and kind of tried to give some education, stroke based. And yeah, so we have like a few people will come and we'll kind of learn about some sort of stroke related product or service or resource in some way. Last month we had people from Vivistim come and talk about their service. We have someone come and talk about adapted vehicles. We've had people talk about adaptive clothing, and just trying to give people like credible sources of information related to stroke recovery or resources for them. That's kind of the goal. And then doing that in an environment that's like safe to maybe like where you feel safe kind of talking about things and maybe sharing your experience, or if people have aphasia, you're in like a safe space to be able to take your time and talk because everybody understands how that might feel. So that's kind of the idea, is to create like a safe environment to get credible information. This month, I think we're going to maybe focus on fall prevention, and yeah, we have a lot of different people come and speak. But it's been really great. I started I trying to like started the group I think like about a year ago now, just to like, I felt like we were doing so much to treat like the whole person related to stroke recovery, but there's just such a big challenge with mental health as well. Not only just like purely from having a stroke, you can have mental health challenges, but then just like the loss and the grief related to that. I felt like I wanted to help our company be able to treat kind of the whole person in that way and create like some sort of support group. So we call it our community group. And now like more of our therapists are involved and will come and we all kind of will work together on it. But yeah, it's been really great. I love helping run that group.
Well, if it's open, maybe I can get the link or how to sign up for the link from you, and maybe some of the folks here or on YouTube might be interested in joining.
Yeah, I can give you the email and then you just send your information and we'll add you to the email list
Right.
and we'll send you the Zoom link.
If you get it to me, I'll put it in the description underneath this video, and I could even, if you want, post it in some of the groups. We have kind of, I guess we're doing something similar here in terms of education. Call this one Recovery in Science. So we try and bring mostly knowledge here on Tuesdays. We also have a Thursday group called Am I Okay? Navigating Life After Stroke, and we talk about the mental aspect of things. Michelle has a Facebook group and Zoom meetings where she does both, but I think a lot of it's mental, because that's a big issue. If you're having mental issues, you're not going to do your homework, no matter how much,
You have to get over the like you said, the grief almost. It's you really it's and then you have to gain an attitude that I can do something about this. I can make some progress. I can make some gains. And so we do talk about it's a hey, how you doing kind of thing. And then some days we have information where and emotional support, just everything.
well,
That's awesome. I love that.
it's good when people share their successes because it gives other people hope.
Exactly. And even your failures, like, hey, I have been there. Why don't you try this? This might work. And sometimes you learn more from trying something and it not working than you do from having something work for you. And even if something didn't work for me, it might work for Billy or Ralph or Mike, so passing information along is really important.
But I remember Brian was the first one to introduce most of the community to those robotic gloves, and we went
Yes.
through a bunch of different iterations with Eric, trying to help him get his whole gym program squared away. Get it. He was putting in a lot of work, but
Right.
it didn't seem to be getting a lot of the benefit because I didn't. Well, you and I. We tried to get him to. Well, he did.
He did actually slow
Focus
down. After we talked to him, he did actually slow the exercise, so he did take our advice.
Well, I mean, you can move your arm a million times, but at some point, taking a more focused approach is going to always get you better results. I'm sure. I mean, that's what Micaela does in her practice, watches people, figures out what they need, what they're responding to, what they're not responding to, and tries to focus in on what's working.
Yeah, that's definitely, I feel like how like the Imago and like the therapists at Imago have definitely seen success is like kind of being able to take everything a little slower. Telehealth really allows that because it's so like one-on-one. There aren't as many like distractions around as well. We also do, I didn't mention earlier, we do like we try to use like technology in the home as well. We use like gamified therapy as well, like different things to try to get people motivated too. It's called like RX games, and that has been helpful for people. Anything, and some people aren't motivated by that, so it kind of just depends, but trying to individualize the therapy as much as possible has been really helpful.
Ralph, one of my goals through my whole 5-year procedure is I'd love to be able to talk to therapists, having, children that are therapists, and I've had good therapists and bad, I'm sure, like we all have. And, the attitude of your therapist has so much to do with your attitude. I can remember being in rehab, and there's some that you were a pain. I was pretty impulsive, and I'm sure I was a pain in the ass for some of them, but then there's other ones who were just, really caring, and you look forward to seeing them. And, that makes all the difference in the world for a patient.
Well,
Now,
that I would agree that that was me. One of the first things, I always like to have a plan with the therapist. I wasn't there to dictate what the therapist should be doing because I'm not a therapist, so I wouldn't be there if I didn't need help. So you have to be open, but I think it's important to be a two-way street and to set goals and work together towards those goals. And the other thing is, if you're in a big city, I had a therapist I didn't care for, and I switched therapists. People don't realize that you can do that. So that's always an option. Not that was more here in South Carolina. When I lived in the North Carolina mountains, I had one physical therapist within an hour, and I didn't care for him because he told me the distance was more important than form, and I had to kind of start over after his physical therapy assistant chased me down the parking lot and said, "He's wrong. I can't tell you this in front of him, but he's wrong." Anyway, yeah, it's interesting to get a good therapist and get a good relationship with them will make a big difference in your recovery. Because again, taking a more focused approach.
I used to tell my guys, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And as fire chief, I used to pounding my guys that customer service is everything. People would call us on our worst day. And, if somebody had a stroke in their house and there was a mess left behind, I expected them to clean it up like they would their own family. And, we would stay and make phone calls to family members for elderly people sometimes. And, those little customer service things are the difference between, success and failure in many, many occasions.
I wanted my therapist to explain to me why and how it fit into my recovery, why we were doing this, what it benefited, how it fit into my recovery. Because, like, if Micaela gives homework and I'm doing therapy all day at home, I'm trying to, in a sense, become my own therapist a lot of the time and build a home program. So to me, it was really important to know how it fit in. And so I was kind of a pain in the butt too. But actually, most of the therapists that I worked with understood where I was coming from because I explained it to them right away on day one. I need to understand. If you don't explain to me how this works and why and how it fits in, then I can't make sense out of it. And
I love when my patients ask me why, so keep doing that. It's my favorite thing. I love being able to explain why what they're doing is important, and it shows how much you care about your recovery too. So I think that's a good question.
I was having a bad day in inpatient rehab, and I had an occupational therapist, and I was really frustrated. She was, "John, it's not your fault you had the stroke, because I was a control freak and I wasn't able to do, I think I was doing clothespins or something, and maybe I threw them, I don't know." But that meant a lot to me, that she had that compassion.
I like also that you guys have kind of brought up a theme of like kind of advocating for yourself if you're not doing something that's important to you in therapy, or there's something that's not quite meeting your needs. I think it's really important to ask for that and being able to be comfortable with your therapist enough to ask. No one else is going to do it for you. So being able to advocate for yourself is a really important skill. Sounds like a lot of you have that skill. So that's really great. You should be proud of that.
Yeah, well, we kind of preach you have to be your own best patient advocate. You have to learn everything you can about the brain. You have to learn how to be a therapist, your own therapist, at least enough to understand it to do it at home and do things that are meaningful. Like I said, some people seem to think they can just, squeeze putty all day and get their hand back, not knowing much about how the extensors are overpowered by the flexors, but that's another discussion. We've had that a half a dozen times. You obviously have to be careful, especially when your hands like that to do too much gripping, because as you know, doing this, your muscles that contract are a lot stronger than the ones that open. So you have to be careful to work towards allowing that extension or opening. Anyway, there I go again to talking occupational therapy when I have an occupational therapist in the house.
Well, the
So
support
it
group,
sounds like you don't mind if people say, well, I don't understand this, or I'm not getting anything out of this. I mean, you don't perceive it negatively if they're trying to correct or steer the ship a little bit.
No, I prefer that. If we're doing an exercise or we're trying to work on a goal that's not important to you, then it's not going to make the changes in the brain that are needed to help your body recover. So I want to hear what motivates you. And yeah, absolutely. Like I love when people are like, I don't get this, or I don't want to do this. Then we find another way that's going to be more motivating. If you're not motivated to do it in therapy while I'm sitting here watching you, then you're probably not going to do it outside. So let's find something that works better for you. That's usually the way I try to approach it, unless it's something that I'm like, no, this is actually really important. See if you can get into it. I'll try to support them through it. But a lot of times I typically will just, whatever my client wants to focus on is something that I'll try to prioritize with them.
Well, I tell people that when I took a guy to physical therapy twice a week for a year, so that's 100 visits. And I don't think he hardly ever said anything. I tried to say, talk. I tell people that it should be a back and forth. It should be a 50-50 conversation unless two things are going on. The therapist is taking care of business in terms of your appointments in and outs, the things that therapists have to do. And if they're teaching you something or demonstrating something, you should be paying strict attention. But when there is time, or if something's being explained and you don't get it, I say speak up, and you should be talking, it should be close to 50-50 conversation, because it's a relationship. It's not like a top-down dump. You get a lot more out of it if you're involved, as opposed to, just going and not saying anything, taking the sheets home, trying to figure out what the heck you're supposed to do. When I ask for homework, I do a couple things. I say I have the therapist demonstrate it. I do it a few times, say, is that right? And they'll say, yeah. If I'm not doing it right, they'll correct me, and I'll do it until I'm getting it right. When I get home, I'll do it a bunch. As soon as I get home, try and lock in the movement into that muscle memory, which is really brain memory, but we use the term muscle memory for some reason. And the other thing I do is I do it all week, and I go back and I show them how much better I do. Because when you do that, you're nodding your head, Micaela. When you have a patient do that, you know one thing. You know that they're doing their homework. It's like a piano teacher. If you don't practice, you don't get better. And the piano teacher knows, and the therapist knows if you're doing the homework. I mean, I've worked with 15 local people, and I've had a couple that would tell me they were doing their homework, and I never called them on it. I'm a volunteer, and it's their recovery, but I could tell they weren't. I mean, if you tell somebody for 2 months to work on putting their heel down, it's not going down at all. They either, number one, have a big problem, or that you're not aware of, or number two, they're not doing the work. And in that case, I figured out the guy wanted to get back in therapy, and we had a vertical walker, and I told him that if he could when he got his foot down, his heel down on the ground, and when he could weight bear for a minute on his affected leg only, would start in the driveway with the vertical walker. And after 2-3 months of no progress at all, by magic, within a month, he was weight bearing for over a minute on his affected leg, and he got his heel down. How'd that happen? I think he started doing his homework. So,
Ralph, what did you do before you had your stroke?
what did I do?
Yes.
I'm still a videographer and still photographer. So I have a YouTube channel with, I think 370 videos on it. A number of them are these Zoom talks, but I've got 120. Haven't counted lately. I'm making them all the time, not all the time, but regularly. Exercise videos. I take a lot of standard stuff like weight bearing or wax on, wax off, and I make simple videos about them and I explain what you're doing. Kind of the same things that I want to know. I want to know why it works. What I need to do is make some videos about how to put all these different exercises together in a program. But like Micaela was saying, she doesn't have a standard thing. There isn't a standard program. On the other hand, I'm dealing with people virtually, and none of the exercise videos I have can get you in real trouble. I've got one about using a pole or a cane to move your arm up, but I've warned people about at least 5 times during the video to stay out of any pain zone. Talk to your, in all my videos, I will tell people to talk to the therapist, or when I recommend things, I'll tell them, if you're in therapy, this is what I'd tell you, run these ideas by your therapist before you do them. That kind of thing, because I'm trying to help people. So I'm still a videographer, and one of the things I'm trying to do is get back to doing more videos and less adminning of groups. So Micaela, you've been generous with your time. Unless anybody's got anything, I think we should let you go and get back to the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can share a quick sentence about the nonprofit if you wanted me to.
Oh
'Cause
yeah,
you mentioned
I'm
you're interested
sorry.
in that.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. If it's time up, that's fine too. Either way.
No. Go ahead, because that's inspiring. It says a lot about you that you've taken on this thing over and above a job as an occupational therapy. By this thing, I mean stroke recovery and serving the stroke community. So yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's also a good resource for people too. So when I was in grad school, I was right when the pandemic happened. So one of my level 2 fieldworks was part in person. I did outpatient neuro, treating people with different neurological injuries. And then my supervisor, her doctoral research, she created a kind of an outline for adapted exercise programs. It was meant to be in person, but we ended up doing them virtually. And then she had the idea to kind of make this into an actual organization. And another student, myself and her name's Carolyn Brown. We co-founded Stroke OT Inc. And they now run stress management, adapted exercise, stretching, cognitive groups every week. And it's just a way to kind of bridge the gap in healthcare. She saw a need for people after they're maybe discharged from therapy. Maybe they hit a plateau and they can't make any more progress, so they've been told, or they just don't have the right resources or information. It's kind of a resource for them to be able to continue their recovery after that and maybe maintain their skills. And then we also have a website that has a lot of different information about stroke recovery at home, different tools to use, and just resources that maybe you didn't fully get all the information you needed in the hospital. And it kind of answers a lot of those questions on there too. So it's a great community to be involved in, and a really great organization so far. We're I think 3 years. I think 3 years. It was 2021, and January 2021 is when it was we officially founded the nonprofit. So yeah, I'm really passionate about it. I'm on the board of directors now. So definitely a lot less hands-on. Carolyn's still running the groups. She's amazing. So she's a really great person to know and be involved with as well. She's so very helpful. So yeah, I'm very passionate about it. I love the organization. I'm so grateful I had the opportunity to do that when I was in school still, and that I can still be a part of it now.
Well, that's great. Me looking away a minute ago was when I wrote down next to get the info on the support group. I'll get the information on the nonprofit and the website and include them in the description underneath the video here. My cat keeps knocking off hard drives and speakers and things. Good boy. Anyway, sorry I forgot what I mentioned earlier, and then forgot about it. So I'm glad you got to talk a little bit about that. And we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and talking to us, and your attitude towards the community with the nonprofit and the support group. And I think I heard you say you started it. So we like
Myself and Kristen also. It was Imago's thing.
advocate for us. We like people who believe in home programs, because we all believe that that's how you get better. You get better at home. That's one reason that John, I set all my videos in my home, and they don't involve anything other than, I got a couple of $2 weights and so a couple of TheraBands and stuff. But I also use hammers and tip clips and towels for wax on, wax off. I don't think you need, it's great if there's nothing wrong with devices, but if insurance companies don't pay for them and you can't afford them, then you have to figure out a way. And that's our whole thing. If we're not getting what we need, we'll try and figure out a way and make it happen for ourselves. So,
I've been meaning, I'll send some pictures because on the Facebook page you have it. I've had to adapt the way I work out, and I guess accept the fact I'm never going to bench 300 pounds again. So my kids have pounded in me. I got to, try to use manageable weights, and I just try to be consistent.
Play the cards you dealt. I've never been able to bench 300 pounds. I never tried, and I'm sure I couldn't do it now. Age is also a factor. We seem to forget that as we age, we aren't as strong. I'm older than you, I'm sure, but anyway, Marilyn's over there smiling because she's up there with close to me. Anyway, Micaela, thank you for your time and all the great knowledge you shared with us. And I'll get those links
Good to meet everybody.
Everybody watch on YouTube. They'll be in the description just below this video. You click on the little thing that says more. I wish they'd put 3 lines back, but all they have now is more or whatever.
Thank you, Micaela.
Thank you so much,
Yeah, thank you,
Micaela. This
guys.
was wonderful. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks. It's
Thank
great to
your
meet
help
you all.
as
Thank you so
always.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do all you can with what you have, in the time you have, in the place you are. Do all you can. Do all you can.